Okay.
Oh, good.
Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Scapitici from the Anthroposophical Society in America, and I'm so glad to welcome you to the webinar tonight with Jonah Evans, The Heart of Easter. And we're going to get started in just a minute, and we have some really interesting tech things happening tonight. So everybody seems to be showing up as a panelist. So maybe everyone's supposed to participate and host this webinar tonight. But when you come in, if you could please make sure your video is shut off and that you are on mute, that would be great. So that's why you see Jonah here a few times. He's actually only here once, and hopefully you can see him and you can see me. And if you can't, you'll be able to see us in just a minute. So please make sure you are mute and that we don't have your video if you're not the actual Jonah Evans. If you're just showing up with your name as Jonah Evans. Okay. So we'll just, we're gonna just have an interesting time of it tonight. I'm just gonna wait another minute or so. Okay, now we have lots of people on. That's great. Now I have an echo. Okay, so I'm going to just ask everybody, which we do each webinar, if you can just type in the Q&A. You should be able to see a little Q&A button. Type in and let me know where you're calling in from or where you're joining us on your computer from. So go ahead. Okay, there's, yes, Ottawa, Ontario, Fargo, North Dakota, Albuquerque, Atlanta, Montreal.
I don't know how to participate really. So.
Oh yeah. So somebody, hi. I'm just gonna, if you come in and your video's on, I'm gonna turn it off, even though I love to see your faces, because we have some funny tech glitch going on. And if you can mute your audio, that'd be great too. Okay, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Andover, Massachusetts, Putney, Vermont, Santa Monica. Where else? Let's see, Hawthorne Valley, hello. Is someone calling from Nebraska? Wow, Calgary, that's great. Waterloo. Let's see, I have a few more here. Vermont, Madison, Mountain View, California, Reno, Nevada. And if you're coming on, hello, Los Angeles. I'm Laura from the Anthroposophical Society, and we're having a funny little tech thing going on. So if you're coming on, can you please make sure your video, hi, your video's off and you're on mute. So though I'd love to see you, I'm going to make sure all your videos are off and that you're all on mute. Okay, so I've got everybody muted. Sorry, everyone. Okay, and you can also just, keep letting me know where you're calling from. Get a few more people typing in. Manchester by the Sea, really? That sounds so beautiful. Anybody else? Vashon, Washington, near Seattle. Okay, more Ottawa. Hey, someone's here from Brazil.
Wonderful.
Someone's here from Brazil. Someone from, oh, British Columbia. Look at all this. This is amazing. So many people here. Temple, New Hampshire. Aubigny.
Oh,
is that right? Wow, do you see all these?
Yeah.
Baltimore. This is amazing. Okay, Auburn, Alabama, Ward, Colorado.
I know a
South
lot of.
You do? How nice. Okay, so everybody, we have some funny little things going on with our tech. So everybody's on mute right now. There'll be chances for a question and answer at the end. Right now, I'm just gonna introduce you, Jonah. So Jonah and I have been having a great time getting this webinar together. We've had many iterations of joining you here today. So we're so glad to be together. And thank you, Jonah, for all your patience and for being here with us just after Easter. And today we are going to talk about Easter. I thought I'd just let people know about you a little bit. We both have families, 3 kids, and so that's been nice to talk about. And you've been a priest since 2008 and working now in Toronto, but previously in South Africa and Spring Valley, New York. And before that, I know you got your psychology degree out here in California. and grew up out here, right?
Yes.
And yeah, and I think the most recent thing is that you were invited to be on the leadership of the seminary in Spring Valley, New York, right? So that's really exciting. So if anything you want to add or anything I got wrong in there, please feel free to.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Okay, so what I'm gonna do just to sort of launch us into this is go to this quote that you've shared with me. Such a beautiful quote about Easter. And I don't know if everybody out there has really felt this mood up until Sunday, and maybe it's still there lingering. So I'm gonna share this, and we'll have a slide up for a little bit, and then we'll just get right into the webinar. So thanks everybody for joining us, and here's the quote. Do you want to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. Sure. Yeah, this is one of my favorite quotes from a lecture called Can I Find the Christ? 1918. So it goes, we cannot excuse ourselves from understanding the mystery of Golgotha simply by saying we have not developed supersensible faculties. We do not need them. If we can truly experience powerlessness and the recovery in the spirit from it, then we have the great good fortune of having a real relationship with the Christ, Jesus.
Thank you so much for reading that. And I think that word powerlessness is so strong and profound in there. So
yeah.
I just want to make sure everybody's okay. And if you can't see Jonah right now, please, you might have some arrows at the end of the little squares with Jonah's name. If you scroll over all the way, you should be able to see him. You won't see him when I'm talking, but when I eventually stop talking, you'll be able to see him. So please let me know if you're having any problems. And we're going to go on now. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, so Laura, you can hear my voice okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Good. So yes, this quote, it's quite important. And it has to do, of course, with the mystery of Golgotha, which, as most of you know, Rudolf Steiner describes as the most important, significant event of human evolution and for human hearts, really. But this quote really starts to point at not only the kind of objective fact of it, but it points to our hearts, in that it says this mystery of Golgotha, this most important deed, actually has to come alive in us and is meant to come alive in us. And this thought was also spoken by a Christian mystic, Angelus Silesius, some of you may know, who also said something like, the Christ can be born 1,000 times in Bethlehem, but if he's not born in your heart, it's all in vain. So this thought here that we don't actually need to be initiates, or we don't need to be clairvoyant to actually get familiar with this experience, this mystery, is really what's significant here. And then it describes it. If we can truly experience powerlessness and the recovery in the spirit from this powerlessness, then we have the great good fortune of having a real relationship with Christ. And we can also add to that in that it says first that we can understand the mystery of Golgotha through this experience, that we don't need supersensible faculties, we don't have to be initiates through this experience. So not only is this experience revealing the mystery of Golgotha, it's also an actual encounter with Christ. So this is the radical thing, that a process like from powerlessness to resurrection in the Spirit in our hearts is actually an encounter. So that is quite a radical thought, I would suggest. that God, the Spirit, Christ, is everywhere accessible. No matter what religion you may practice, what philosophy you may, cultivate in your mind, no matter where you are on the face of the earth, this experience of powerlessness into recovery in the Spirit or into resurrection in the Spirit is always possible and always a potential happening. So what this is also then saying is that God is not, the Spirit is not a state of being. It's a way. The Spirit is a living way that we can tap into and go that way.
Right. So I sort of hear this like it's not the arrival at something more. It's the experience and the journey and the mucking about and the right in there.
That's right. And it's also the arrival, right? Because the recovery Spirit is definitely experienced as an arrival, but it also doesn't leave out this mucking about. Yeah, but this real, it's also quite, and that's what I want to illustrate in a couple of stories. It's quite a very specific and exact place of the soul that is called powerlessness. So perhaps we can go then a bit into the stories that I have to illustrate this. So the first story is a dear person who was with me for some years in Spring Valley, and she lived at the fellowship there, and her name was Amelia. And Amelia was a very dedicated person. She was very diligent in all that she did, very kind. And she was then diagnosed with cancer, bone cancer. And she tried and tried. So she did everything that the doctors said. She changed her diet completely. She did all the right meditations. She was a dedicated anthroposophist. She read all the right books. She concentrated her thoughts on all the right things, and then one day when she was actually started to get bedridden, she asked me to come, and so I came, and I was a priest then. And I sat by her bed, and she was getting to the stage where she was really restless. But she said in a kind of a clear moment, she said, "Why, Jonah, why is this happening? I've done everything right. I've got all the right books. I've done all the meditations. I've done everything that the doctor has said. I've done all the Iskador. Why is it not going away?" And then there was a moment where I didn't know the answer, and she didn't know the answer, and you could feel us both kind of entering a surrendered space, a powerless space. And then in that kind of opening to the question, an answer came. And that was that sometimes illnesses don't want to be changed by us. They come to mold and shape us. That's what came into my heart at that moment. And for her, this answer, which seems simple, sometimes illnesses don't want to be molded by us, but want to mold us, it was a key. It opened a perspective that was radically different than what she was holding before. She was holding the perspective that if she's spiritually on track, it will go away because that's what's meant to happen. If you're good, if you follow the rules, yeah, that essentially that God will reward you. And so for her at that moment, there was a whole new shift, and you could feel in her and in the space a kind of peace descending. And she felt then incredibly grateful, not to me, but for the Spirit, that something new had shown her a new way of seeing. And the amazing thing is then she walked through the last stages of her life with this peace. So this story then illustrates a practical, real, concrete example of what it means to go through powerlessness and find recovery in the Spirit. Because one of the keys is that to find this place of powerlessness, the human soul must strive. We must strive for something out of our own will that we think is right, and strive and strive and strive, and you could say hit a wall, where our striving can't then accomplish what we thought we needed. And then, as she did, so she strove for healing, right? Of course. But when she hit this wall, she was able to let go of that will, that this cancer was there for her to get rid of, and allow her heart to enter into a kind of surrendered place of an unknown. She was able to let go of that will. This must be healed. and surrender it and come into a question. And then, as a gift, this new perspective was able to come through me, but it really wasn't me, because I also didn't know the answer when she asked it. And it changed her heart. The recovery in the spirit, as the example shows, was really the peace that she was able to have and be blessed with walking through death.
It's a really powerful example, and I'm sure there's so many people on this call right now that can relate to this.
Yeah.
This change that happens for people.
Yeah. And I would wager that there are many of the souls online right now with us that have had some kind of experience like this.
Mm-hmm.
And the radical thing is that Steiner here is saying that this experience that is universal, could be universal at any moment, is a connection to the mystery of Golgotha, to Easter, to the heart of Easter. It is also an encounter with Christ. Even if we're not saying the word or going to church, this powerlessness into resurrection of your heart is his footprint. How he comes alive in you. Yeah. So can I tell another story?
Yes, please tell another story. Please tell another story. That was a beautiful story.
Great.
And then we'll have time for people to share too, if there's
great.
something that's really resonating,
Yeah.
or questions that are coming up. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So it's a personal story. So I have 3 daughters. One of them, the middle one, Saskia, she was born, and we didn't know this when she was born, but she was born with a genetic disorder. And the disorder is that she can't process potassium correctly. So it's really quite rare. But we didn't know this until she was about 1. And we found out in a quite dramatic way. She had to go to the hospital on the brink of death. And yeah, it was quite difficult for Katie and I, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And so then shortly after she was diagnosed, we got sent to Toronto, where they have some of the leading experts of this particular disease only here.
Wow.
Really felt led. But we were struggling for a good year here to get her the right medications and the whole just rhythm of everything. And then at one point she had a crash, and she has periodic crashes, but this was a kind of first for us in that process. And it was right in a busy time. It was right around Holy Week of a couple of years ago. And I was just working all hours. And then she had this crash, and it was in the evening. And so I had to take her to the hospital, which is downtown, about 45 minutes drive. And we stayed in the room, in the hospital bed all night. And they were just trying to balance out her blood salts and make sure that she was okay before we left. And all of this we thought it would take a couple hours, but it ended up taking all night. And basically at about 7 a.m., they finally told us we could go. And so I was, of course, just exhausted. And also, I was also kind of exhausted from trying to find how to help Saskia. And everything we did, we just came into this helpless place. And so with all this, then I pick up the 2 bags in one hand. I pick up Saskia because she's not really stable on her feet, really, that at this point. And so I put her on my shoulders. And we walk out of the hospital, and it starts to rain. And the rain, of course, rain is wonderful, and, but at that moment, for me, with all that we had gone through and just all the strain and stress, it was kind of like the last straw. And I just felt defeated. And I was just, and I knew because I had to go. Also, I had to give a talk that day, and I had all these appointments. And I was thinking, how am I going to do all this? And I was just inwardly bereft. And then this little voice on top of my shoulder says, Daddy, how far will you carry me? And it hit me. It hit me so strongly. In this place of helplessness. It just called me, so inwardly I fell on my knees, you could say, and called out to the Spirit, called out to Christ for help. Because I didn't have much strength, any strength. And it was more than just that moment. It was really a call. I felt like she was calling for her whole life, how far will you carry me in my life? This illness. And then I had the experience in that moment where I just felt this kind of wash of strength come down. And it carried me and it carried her. Yeah.
And now you're making me cry. I can just imagine this little voice, and how we hear, I think this experience can come from so many different places where this sort of resurrection can come from.
That's right.
So many people, or even maybe a bumblebee or I mean, anything, right? Can come from so many places, a ray of sunlight or the rain, like you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the key there was this coming to this place of really not knowing, really emptiness, powerlessness, and letting go of my will to make it happen, figure it out, make it all better, handle it out of my own power, and surrender that will, but not resign. That's the key. Not resign. It's not resignation, but it's inwardly attuning the heart to something, a strength bigger than you. And trusting that that's possible to receive. And that's a universal thing, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Saskia story.
What a girl. Wow. Okay, so we have one more story for us, and
I've
then
got lots of stories. We can.
I wonder if we can just ask if in the Q&A, this is the best place to do this, if anybody has any questions so far, anything that they, or an observation or a thought that they want to share in there before we go to the next story. So I think the Q&A is the best place to do that. If you can't figure out where the Q&A is, you can use the chat too.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, how old is she now? Is one of the questions.
Oh, Saskia, she's 5, just about to turn 6.
Mm,
Yeah.
lovely.
She's a light.
I bet.
Yeah, and we still, it's still quite a process.
Mm-hmm.
Quite a process.
Hmm. Okay, so why don't you tell us that last story?
Yeah.
Then,
Okay.
yeah.
This is a story. So this, of course, can also this can happen in any aspect of our life, particularly, but not only when we are faced with a difficulty, of course, in illness, in relationships, in work. But this story is from an initiation story. So this is also a deeply important key and truth to how the soul can properly go through initiation in our time.
And can you just, I think most people are going to be familiar with Mystery of Golgotha.
Yeah.
Some people won't know exactly what that means, and some people won't know initiation. So can you just, those
Sure.
two, just say what those are?
Yeah. The mystery of Golgotha is just a term that Rudolf Steiner uses to name the death and resurrection of Christ at Easter. And Golgotha is the hill on which the crucifixion occurred.
Thank you.
So, and then also initiation is basically how the human self, the human heart, reconnects freely and consciously with the Spirit, with God. Yeah?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
And this is a story of initiation that is in a wonderful book by my dear colleague, Bastien Ban. And the book is called The Lord of the Elements. There it is.
Very nice.
And it's a story about Malidoma Some, who is a gentleman, an initiate from Burkina Faso. And he was also a teacher of a good friend of mine, Orland Bishop, which you will be working with, I know, in New Orleans soon.
Yes, yes.
So this story is from Malidoma, and it's a story about one of his initiatory experiences when he was a young boy. And he gets taken out of his tribe in Burkina Faso, and he gets placed in a French school where he learns all of the intellectual training that, that the Jesuits have to offer. And then at about 14, he's placed back in his tribe, and the elders of the tribe want him to be initiated like all the other young boys. And so the first experience is they put them all in front of trees. So about 10 paces away from a tree. And they have to sit there and they have to try to experience the being of the tree, to break through what I can only see with my senses to the spiritual being that is the tree. And Malidoma was struggling with this. And the elders thought it was because of this white man's medicine, the education that he got. And I'll just read this little quote that describes the heart of his story here. It says, Malidoma tormented himself sitting in front of this tree to try to find the being of the tree. He tormented himself for hours, even days, until out of his experience of deep impotence, something broke open. Tears streamed down the young boy's face. He was at his wit's end, powerless, surrendered, letting go of the desire to break through. And in this utter vulnerability, his soul opened up to the being of the tree. He entered this world of the elementals, and suddenly nature was ablaze like a fire. And he said, where I was now was just plain real. Yeah? So that's a different perspective, a different type of experience, but the archetype, yeah, is still there. We can still trace it with our thinking. That he too had to go through this place, what we name now as powerlessness, where he surrendered his will to grasp and get the experience that he wanted, and went into even described as a kind of impotence, a surrender that broke open a kind of vulnerability in his heart, that then allowed this spiritual being of the tree to encounter him in his heart. So again, we have from powerlessness to recovery in spirit. And even though you could say these experiences, the radical thing here is that these experiences are very different, yeah? But the radical thing is that they're actually all encounters with the breath of Christ. They're all encounters with real resurrection, real death. Death to your own will and resurrection from the gift of the Spirit.
Wow. This death to your own will is very powerful. I have people sending some questions in. Do you mind if I start to go? Okay, so I'm just going to read one comment saying that they really understand the story that you shared about your daughter, because their daughter had Rise syndrome just after she turned 1, and she said she was looking, this person was looking for an answer as to why a small child would have to suffer so much, and this led him to Steiner, and so there was this, right? Yeah, so that's, I'm just thinking of you being in Toronto, and I mean, all these things where we're, broken open by something and led then. Okay, so a couple more questions. Can you show the book again? Someone is asking for the book. Okay. Lord of the Elements by Bastian Baan.
Yeah.
Lord of the Elements by Bastian Baan, Baan, just in case anybody's just listening. Okay, and then there was another question. How do you know? I have two questions here. One is, how do you know it's the Christ in these events?
Yeah.
I mean, so maybe if someone's not familiar with that, or they don't identify with that, I think it can be harder in our times to identify with that being, or that just that word, I think, can be hard for people, or that name can be hard for people. How do you know? Wow, we have lots of questions coming. So I'll let that one sit, and then a couple more.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, we can gather a few and then.
Okay, should I gather a few?
For my
Or do you want to take that one on? I think let's just go with that one. How do you know?
Yeah,
You know it's the Christ.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, first of all, you know, to live with the question, that question is a really interesting question. But Steiner there, he lays the seed. He says, this process, that from that quote, this process of powerless is a real encounter with the Christ Jesus. And so for me, I just had to live with that for a while and say, well, how do I know that is really the Christ? The first thing is, it's not actually immediately important. We don't need to make sure people know that's Christ. The most important thing is that one feels and has the experience of that, from powerlessness to the Spirit. The label that is actually Christ's being working in us can come later, or maybe not at all. But the Christian initiate will be able to see in someone's biography, that is the footprint of this Christ being, because he is doing it. Not only did he do it at Easter, but he is doing it now in the spirit, in the etheric world, constantly. So that's why, as an initiate, as the highest Christian initiate of our time, Rudolf Steiner could say such a word, because he can see the footprint of a spiritual being and how it works in our hearts. But again, I want to emphasize that this is something, it's so valuable because it's not connected to a belief system. You can get the full value of that living archetype in your heart without using that label. You don't have to.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, beautiful. Okay, here comes some more. Okay, this is interesting. So thank you for the stories. And how is the experience of powerlessness and what that may lead to related to selflessness?
Yeah.
And what that may bring? Both seem to be the absence of something, allowing space for something else.
That's it.
So it's a very thoughtful question.
Beautiful, beautiful question. So this is the key. I mean, the most common objection or question I get about powerlessness is it seems like it's victimhood, or that we're losing our self, our ego, but that's not what's meant. So it's not resignation. It's deeply connected to selflessness, like the person asked. But one could imagine it more like a chalice, like a grail, like the self has to break open, become like a cup. We don't leave ourselves, but we purify our human ego by letting go, surrendering our personal will that's attached to particular outcomes. And that letting go actually allows the heart, allows the spirit to open up like a cup. And if we can bear then the unknownness, the anxiety of the unknown, and really ask the Spirit for help, then something new will come. This has the effect, if one learns this more and more, and one can, this has the effect that it leads to the human heart becoming more and more selfless in the best sense. It leads to deeper love for human beings, deeper love for God, a deeper love for creation, which is selflessness. But it's not selflessness of, as in that the self is gone, but the self becomes a more and more pure vessel, grail for Christ.
Thank you. And thank you for that great question.
Beautiful question.
Okay, wow, more coming. I think this one relates to what you just said, and I think you said yes. I think your answer is yes to this question. Do you find, or maybe not, do you find it gets any easier to enter into the powerlessness and vulnerability over time? Does it get easier?
Yes and no. So I would say you get more familiar with the signs and how to start to surrender your own will and enter into or attune yourself to the higher will of what wants to come. But the trials get harder and more subtle. So on the one hand, yes, your heart gets more familiar with this way. But on the other hand, your life gets more arduous and more rich at the same time.
I like what you're saying about the subtlety, because it's like when it's these big events, you notice, you wake up, there's something that's so noticeable. But then when it's like in a relationship with a sibling, or when it's in, there's these times where it's much more subtle, but it's still the same if you can do this letting go, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And especially along the meditative or sacramental prayer path, where you're more and more entering the spiritual world, the trials get more
refined.
But the archetype stays the same.
Right.
This process of this language of the heart, you could even call it.
Okay, more. People are asking great things.
Yeah.
Okay, I have someone that just said an observation that they had this dream where I think lots of us have had a dream sort of like this, where nobody liked them and everyone had turned against them, and they kept trying to do the right thing and they were rejected and nobody wanted them and they felt no love. And then they woke up from this dream and they thought, and they sat with it and they thought, wow, this is maybe what that being felt like, Christ, when he was being led to this place, and he had felt so much love, and from the outside nobody was loving him. So I think there's something else in here. Can you say something about this? Because I wonder how he felt, if he was. What do you think?
The Christ, eh?
Yeah, I was looking at the Stations of the Cross. I happened to be in a few churches recently, and just watching these panels go, through these different stages, and his mother, and then these children, and these people that were being terrible to him, and all these different, and in certain pictures, certain people had halos, and then in some pictures there was no one with that happening around him. And so I don't know, you could say something.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a bit different, because the Christ Jesus doesn't have any personal wounds.
Mm.
He doesn't have any personal karma in that he's trying to work out certain wounds that he had from childhood or whatever, like we all do. Yeah. He was really taking on and suffering humanity's wounds. And from that place, it's kind of hard to imagine from our own experience, but he was suffering these things like the lack of love from others, the lack of recognition, the lack of understanding. I mean, even from his own disciples, they didn't get it. And he was suffering these things tremendously, but not as personal. He didn't take it personally, so to speak, but he suffered the pain because this lived in humanity. So if I think we can understand it if we've ever had to suffer something where we weren't personally triggered by it, but we still walked with it, still suffered the pains of it.
Yes.
But weren't triggered by it.
Mm-hmm.
That's more of the Christ's experience, you could say. But a level of pain that we can barely imagine because it was humanity's pain.
Right.
Yeah. So I hope, I don't know if that answered his question, or her question.
Yeah, she was just commenting on a dream,
Yes.
So, okay. Let's see. So there are two, let me do this one, and then there's two that kind of go together.
Right.
I'm just going to read this. Breaking open to our vulnerability and sharing in that silent space of questioning, contemplation with, and the mystery of not knowing what others can lead to deep connection. So this not knowing can lead to deep connection. And this person's sort of seeing a sense of a magic that envelops the space as people are silent and they're in this unknowing, and there's this peace and powerlessness moving towards resurrection. So the question, it's a rather anthroposophical question is here. Could it be the etheric Christ that I'm sensing that lives in this space of unknowing?
Definitely. Yeah.
Can you explain in one sentence? Can you explain the etheric Christ in one sentence? In case people don't know what etheric Christ means, maybe you could just sort of give that a little.
This is just a term, the etheric Christ is just a term that Rudolf Steiner uses to describe how we can experience the Christ today, now. That he is constantly with us, close to us, in the place just beyond the material sense world.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah. So I would say to her, yes, that this being, you see, there are levels of this being, awareness of this being. This footprint that we're talking about, powerlessness into recovery, is the first layer of becoming acquainted with or close to this being. We don't even have to have the label. But at the level that the participant is talking about, then it starts to actually, one feels a kind of a presence. And then that's more of kind of the being proper.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I think this kind of leads to the next question, actually, because you're talking about this relationship with this being, or how we experience this being. And so there's these two questions that I feel go together. One is about suggestions for communicating this spirituality, this person says spiritual truth, to a young person who resists or they deny it. And then the second question is saying that I'm sure there's many experiences like this that happen out there a lot, where people have these really profound experiences. And any thoughts on how a critical mass might begin to be outwardly noticeable, and any thoughts on a critical mass and how this might begin to be outwardly noticeable in humanity? So it's, we've got maybe people that, again, even shirk at, or I don't know, just have a reaction to the word Christ, right? Because of the way our culture is right now. And then, how do you help them with these perceptions? Because probably so many people are experiencing things, but they're not talking about them. So where's this critical mass?
That's right.
We can end on this question, I think.
Okay. Well, I mean, this is a great question. And I think the first part of it was about young people, right?
Yeah.
Well, how to approach young people with this. And I mean, the universal quality of this quote and these stories and this archetype, really, of powerlessness into real being gifted by the Spirit and feeling renewed, liberated. This is something that you can bring by trying to get in touch with it in your own life. And then simply not using any labels like Christ, but then talking to your young people about this process in human hearts, like I'm doing with these stories. And you don't have to even label it. You don't even have to go, but that this is how the human heart becomes more human. That's it. This is how the human heart becomes more related to love, to joy that is a deep joy, to a joy that can bear sorrow as well and not be snuffed out. So
I'm gonna cry again. That is so beautiful. Can you just say that one more time? This is how the human heart becomes more related to love and to joy and sorrow.
And deep joy that does not get snuffed out when sorrow comes. Tears of joy are the seed in our body of this truth. And the fact of the matter is that anyone who's really gone through these types of things can be more compassionate, more loving, more human. So you can, if you feel it's important to name that being of love, the Christ, then that may be important at a certain point. But the universal experience is the key. And that's an archetype that no matter if you're Muslim or Buddhist or whatever, human beings can connect with this.
And I think especially of younger people, and I have a younger brother and sister, and they're 16 and 18 years younger than I am, and just depression and anxiety, and I feel like that generation can relate to that so strongly and has seen it all around them, and there are pills for everything. And this idea of the heart and joy that can't be snuffed out through painful experiences, I think that's so resonant. I think that's will resonate with them so strongly because they see it all around them all the time.
That's right.
So
that's right. And this is also it's so important because many of the spiritual paths that we can find in the bookstores and different things also, they don't work with the picture that sorrow can be integrated into joy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's more like, change your mind and then all the good stuff will come to you. But this is a different way that actually allows us to relate with our hearts as human souls to all of life's experience, no matter what comes.
Right.
And that God is with us in every aspect at any moment. if we can go this way. And this is why in the gospel, he also says, I am the way. The Christ says, I am the way. Because it's a path.
Right.
That human souls, human hearts are actually designed to awaken to.
Thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And I so appreciate you sharing these stories and sharing this wisdom with us. And I hope many more people will tune in and gain this understanding in their hearts and in their whole life. Okay, thank you, everybody. I see people saying thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, everyone. And I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Till next time. Yes. Bye-bye.